Welcome. Tonight we step carefully into the fog-choked alleys and gaslit boulevards of Victorian London, where the air smells faintly of soot, soap, and secrets. You walk beside the trembling flicker of a street lamp, past a newsboy hawking scandal sheets, and hear the shuffle of boots behind a drawn curtain. A woman in a dark cloak leans on an iron fence, her face hidden beneath the shadow of a feathered hat. You glance just for a moment and realize she's watching you too. This isn't the version of history they taught in school. This is the underlayer, the murmur beneath the manners, the London that kept two faces, one for the daylight and one for after dark. The lives of prostitutes and their clients were woven into the very lace of Victorian society, visible, scandalous, and yet constantly denied. You might imagine a world of corsets and chivalry, but the truth is stickier. With every polished bootstep, you're walking toward a society obsessed with sexual virtue, yet thoroughly dependent on vice. You probably won't survive this without rethinking what proper even means. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and what time it is where you're listening, because trust me, someone in 3 above Minneapolis is nodding along with you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in 1872, Southwark, across the Thames. The mist is heavy tonight. Everything feels slowed, like molasses poured from a cracked jar. The horses' hooves clop gently on the wet stones, and gas lamps halo the gloom in a sleepy golden blur. You're not far from London Bridge, but far enough that the respectable folk aren't watching too closely. A woman in a blue shawl stands at a distance from the tavern door. She doesn't speak, she just waits. She is one of the unfortunates, a broad term Victorians used when they wanted to sound sympathetic without actually helping. She is also one of about 9,000 registered sex workers in London at the time, and likely one of tens of thousands unregistered. You walk slowly, letting your eyes adjust. The silhouettes here don't just sell sex, they survive through it. Their lives are shaped not just by desire, but by urban expansion, poverty, and a whole architecture of shame. Victorians were obsessed with morality, but that obsession didn't stop anyone from looking the other way, especially when money changed hands. Even the streets themselves tell you stories. You pass Vine Street, known for its police station, and then Barrack, where Madame Jeffries once operated a brothel so elite, even the future Edward VII is rumored to have dropped in. Historians still argue whether that one is true, or just a way to spice up the prince's already spicy reputation. You pass posters pasted to lampposts, lost dogs, missing children, cures for female troubles, and advertisements for boarding houses that subtly imply no questions asked. You pause near a lamplit pub where a man in a dusty stovepipe hat stumbles out, wiping ale from his chin. He's alone now, not for long. Because here's the thing, prostitution wasn't a seedy corner of Victorian life. It was baked into its social fabric, widely tolerated, occasionally legislated, always whispered about. The same newspapers that condemned immorality ran titillating court transcripts. The same clergyman preaching modesty might sneak across the Thames in borrowed coats. Even Charles Dickens, that old moralist, ran a home for fallen women, though his own personal relationships with them remain, let's say, a topic of lively scholarly debate. But if you think the women were all desperate, pretty, or doomed, think again. Some were survivors of abuse, some were single mothers, some were cunning entrepreneurs who turned a cruel system inside out. You pass a boarding house owned by a retired courtesan who rents only to other women in the trade. She takes a cut, sure, but she also provides clean water, decent meals, and something even rarer, a lock on the door. Quirky fact for tonight, some brothels use colored candles in the window to signal specific services. Red meant new girls, blue meant discretion. Green. Well, no one really agrees what green meant, but let's just say it wasn't gardening advice. Your path narrows now. The street tightens between buildings, and the gas lamps grow fewer. You step over a trickle of runoff and hear soft humming from a second-floor window. A woman's voice, off-key but sweet. She's sewing by candlelight, mending a corset, probably not her own. Many of these women worked multiple roles. Seamstress by day, companion by night. That double life was a delicate balance and an exhausting one. They'd have to clean their shoes between shifts just to avoid suspicion from nosy neighbors. Respectability was a fragile mask. Victorian men, meanwhile, lived with a very different kind of duality. On paper, they were moral guardians. In practice, they were often repeat customers. The real irony? Many of these men were terrified of women's sexuality, even as they paid to be close to it. One popular urban myth claimed that a man could catch syphilis simply from shaking hands with a woman who had it. Still, doctors invented elaborate precautions for male clients. One physician sold a prophylactic made of oiled silk described as reusable if carefully rinsed. Ooh, and also, no, you duck into an alley. The smell shifts here, coal smoke gives way to roast meat and stale beer. You're back near a tavern now, and the glow from its windows seems friendlier. A woman leans out the back door, tossing potato peelings to the gutter rats. She sees you. She nods. Not all might end badly. Many of these women, some as young as 14, others approaching 40, developed networks of support. They formed informal unions, shared information, even sent funds to sick relatives in the countryside. One brothel kept a book club. Another offered French lessons just in case a client asked for conversation first. So here you are now. The gaslights flicker lower, the fog curling tighter. You keep walking, letting the voices of this hidden world trail behind you like steam from a kettle. And you haven't even reached the park. You head north toward Soho now, boots slick with rain and time, guided more by instinct than street memes. The air has changed. It's warmer here, heavier with perfume and pipe smoke, and something else, a tension you can't quite name. It's like walking into a theater mid-performance, the audience pretending they're not watching the actors, and the actors pretending not to see the crowd. This is where the masks come out. You're in the district of double lives, where a barmaid becomes a duchess in the space of a whispered alias, and a gentleman trades his top hat for anonymity. Everyone plays pretend here. The trick is knowing who's pretending harder. The women of Soho wear veils not just over their faces, but over their entire stories. That girl in the green ribbon, she's listed as a housemaid on the census. In truth, she works from a flat above a shoemaker, charging by the hour and keeping half her income hidden in the fireplace bricks. You watch her walk by a group of older women. One dips her head in recognition. There's a silent hierarchy here. Brothel workers were considered established, with stability and rules. The freelancers, called private women, were more vulnerable but fiercely independent. Then there were the real illusionists, the courtesans. Courtesans didn't sell moments. They sold mythology. Imagine you're one of them now. It's late afternoon. You sitting in a rented salon with burgundy drapes and a tray of grapes you don't intend to eat. You've spent 4 hours getting ready. Perfumed hair, silk gloves, and just the right amount of powdered indifference. You don't rush to greet him when he enters. He has to earn it, at least a little. Men loved these women not just for what they offered, but for the fantasy they fed. Some courtesans styled themselves after actresses or queens of ancient Rome. One kept a pet monkey. Another never repeated a dress. Yet another claimed she slept on a velvet rope mattress because it reminded her not to settle. It worked. She was booked for months. Historians still argue whether these women were empowered or exploited. Maybe both. The Victorian world rarely allowed women to own their stories. But these women, however, briefly rented theirs out at a premium. You step into a quiet shop off Oxford Street. It smells of ink and rose oil. The back room is not really a room. It is more of a converted pantry with a velvet chaise and no windows. The man who owns the shop is rumored to keep names in a little black book. It's never been found, of course. But sometimes, if you tip him enough, he'll accidentally mention a viscount who once left a calling card here. Everyone, it seems, wears two faces. Even the police knew this. Most officers turned a blind eye unless someone complained, and when they did, it was often the landlady, not the prostitute, who got in trouble. Renting a room for immoral purposes could land you in court, but only if your neighbors did not mind their own business. That's why the best ones knew how to perform not just seduction, but respectability. You visit a narrow boarding house run by a woman called Miss Grice. No one knows her first name. She's been there 20 years. She wears a crucifix and corrects your grammar. Her tenants are music teachers, all of whom seem to keep very odd hours. One even receives clients disguised as piano students, complete with sheet music and a fake metronome that never ticks. Downstairs, a man waits with a bouquet. He doesn't speak to anyone. He pretends he's lost. You both know he isn't. Here's your quirky tidbit for this stroll. Some brothels use trained parrots to warn when police were near. Copper at the door. They'd squawk, followed by enthusiastic swearing in 3 languages. The birds were so notorious that one magistrate once asked a madam if her parrot would be testifying. The humor, of course, doesn't quite erase the risks. A single accusation could unravel a life. Many women kept coded diaries or used fake names so often they'd forget their real ones. It wasn't just about survival, it was about control. And in a society where women couldn't vote, inherit much, or be seen walking alone without suspicion control was its own currency. You pass a church now, Gothic, grand, bells tolling like distant coughs. Ironically, many Victorian prostitutes made regular donations to churches, partly for redemption, partly to appear legitimate. Some even had reserved pews. Victorian men, for their part, were masters of compartmentalization. A man could visit a brothel on Saturday and take communion on Sunday, convinced the two had no relation. He might even confess to his doctor, not his priest after all, one prescribed ointments and the other eternal judgment. Guess which hurt more? And yet, for all this repression, or perhaps because of it, London was bursting with erotic contradiction. You see it in the literature. You see it in the fashion. You see it in the faint blush of a woman's wrist as she lifts her skirt an inch too high by accident, of course. Everything was coded. Every gesture meant something. And the people fluent in those codes, they ruled the night. There's a saying whispered in some corners of Mayfair, a good man avoids temptation. A clever one books in advance. That's the world you're in now. A world of social theater so convincing, even the actors forget the script. As you move down the side street, a young woman waves at a hansom cab. She steps in like she's been expected, smooth as mercury, and vanishes into the London night, and you're starting to see what she's hiding and what everyone else is pretending not to know. You're deeper into the city now, and the fog has begun to thin, revealing iron railings, uniformed doormen, and buildings with more columns than scents. But beneath all this stone and structure, there's a pulse anxious, judgmental, and hypocritically fascinated. You glance up. A flickering gaslight casts shadows across a red-bricked hall, and beside it, a sign hammered to the fence reads Magdalene Society for the Reformation of Fallen Women. You blink. Yes, that's what it really said. Fallen like Eve, like Grace, like a leaf from a very judgy tree. This is where the Victorian moral panic really gets theatrical. You step inside figuratively, unless you want to smell boiled cabbage for the next 6 hours, and the air feels dense with good intentions and even better reputations. A stern woman in black leads a silent group of girls in daily prayers. Most are between 16 and 22. All wear identical uniforms, their personal histories erased and rewritten as cautionary tales. This is how Victorian society dealt with the problem of prostitution. Not by changing the economics that forced women into it, but by punishing those women for surviving it. The term fallen woman was elastic. It can mean someone who sold sex, yes, but also someone who had an affair, got pregnant outside marriage, or simply looked like she might. It was a concept soaked in double standards. Men were led astray. Women fell. Gravity apparently only pulled one direction. You're shown a leaflet printed by some well-meaning vicar. It promises salvation, shelter, and moral training, which turns out to be laundry work, needlepoint, and very little actual moral flexibility. The goal wasn't to empower women, it was to erase their pasts, press them flat into society's corset, and lace it tight until they could barely breathe. Historians still argue whether these institutions helped or harmed. Some women did find safety in new lives. Others ran away within days. One famously stole a priest's horse and rode it straight to a music hall audition. She didn't get the part, but she did get a standing ovation for the story. Here's your mainstream fact of the night. By 1857, England had passed the Matrimonial Causes Act, allowing men to divorce wives for adultery, but women could only divorce their husbands if they also proved cruelty or desertion. Adultery alone wasn't enough. You had to bleed and beg. Equality was still a long way off. The hypocrisy wasn't subtle. The same parliament members writing moral laws were frequently on the ledgers of high-end brothels. Even Queen Victoria's own courtiers were known to frequent the theaters, a popular euphemism for brothel visits disguised as cultured evenings. You pass a wall covered in pasted handbills, some advertising rescue homes, others warning about disease, a few preaching abstinence with truly terrifying illustrations. One features a woman sinking into quicksand labeled temptation, while a faceless man waves from shore holding a Bible like it is a flotation device. But what did women think of all this? That's harder to answer. Letters from the time show a spectrum of emotions: shame, defiance, resignation, ambition. Some clung to hope, others to gin, and some simply learned to fake virtue well enough to pass. You pass a chemist's shop with a side entrance labeled for ladies. Inside, women could buy tonics for nervous complaints, female ailments, and private distress. Some of these tonics were harmless herbal teas. Others were loaded with opium, mercury, or cocaine. One even advertised itself as ideal for hysteria and regret. You beginning to understand Victorian prostitution wasn't tea just a job or a scandal. It was an entire cultural performance. And not everyone was watching from the same seat. Many reformers were upper-class women with time, money, and zero lived experience. They wanted to help, but on their terms. They offered cleansing and scripture, but rarely wages or housing. It's a bit like giving a drowning person a moral lecture on water safety. Still, some were sincere. Florence Nightingale herself once wrote that society's obsession with sexual shame was barbaric and stifling. But Florence was kind of busy. Quirky tidbit here. One particularly zealous reform group handed out medals to women who stayed pure for a full year after rescue. They were made of tin, shaped like lilas, and had to be returned if the woman relapsed. Imagine being told to mail your morality back like a library book. The women in these institutions weren't just recovering, they were enduring. Silence was a survival strategy. Humility was enforced. You might lose your name, your hair, even your correspondence. But if you played by the rules long enough, you might be allowed to work as a servant in someone else's home. And even then, one wrong rumor could unravel it all. You leave the building now, stepping back into the night air, the silence louder than ever. You realize this place wasn't just about punishment. It was about performance. These women were made to prove they had changed, even when the world hadn't. Outside, a different girl leans on a railing. She sees you come out. She doesn't say anything, but her eyebrows lift just slightly. She knows where you've been. Maybe she's been there too. And maybe she escaped before they could reach. The street has changed again. It's brighter now, surprisingly cheerful, with a little more bustle and the smell of cinnamon drifting from a nearby bakery. You hear laughter, a rare sound in this story, as two young boys chase a hoop down the pavement. But even here, in this sun-dappled part of Clockenwell, the shadows are never far behind. You're about to meet someone important. She's not in any textbook, though she probably should be. Her name is Mrs. Thistle, not her real name, of course. She borrowed it from a book of garden herbs, said it made her sound harmless. She's in her late 40s now, dressed in dark wool, and walks with a cane carved from a parasol handle. You'd never guess that she runs one of the most profitable rescue homes in London. But here's the twist. Mrs. Thistle doesn't believe in rescue. Not really. Her home houses about 30 women, most of whom once worked in brothels or on the streets. They eat 3 meals a day, learn basic literacy, and sew uniforms for local schools. That's the official version. The unofficial one? Half of them still take clients on Thursday nights quietly through a back gate, while Mrs. Thistle pretends not to notice. I'd rather see them warm, fed, and safe than starving and respectable, she once said. Besides, if the Lord disapproves, he can send a letter. You sit in her cramped office, sipping meat tea. A cat dozes on a shelf above the fireplace. On the wall hangs a cross, but next to it, quite cheekily, is a portrait of Aphrodite. Mrs. Thistle isn't confused, she's just thorough. This, you realize, is part of a much larger game. During the 1870s and 1880s, rescue work became not only a moral campaign, but a business opportunity. Some homes received government stipends, charitable donations, and even church subsidies. The more girls they took in, the more support they received. No one asked too many questions. One especially entrepreneurial reverend even published before and after portraits of his saved girls, conveniently taken by the same photographer who moonlighted shooting for London's seedier papers. Redemption, it turns out, had excellent branding. Historians still argue whether this was exploitation in disguise or simply pragmatism wrapped in piety. Either way, the math was clear. Saving women paid sometimes better than sinning did. Here's your quirky tidbit of the evening. One reform home funded itself by selling fruitcake baked by its residents. The cakes were shipped all over England, and people loved them until someone printed a rumor that the icing was made with fallen women's tears. Sales skyrocketed. You can't make this stuff up. Back in Mrs. Thistle's hallway, 2 girls argue over whether Lord Tennyson looks better clean-shaven or not. You pass them as they fold laundry and trade gossip. One of them, Mary, no older than 17, glances at you with a sharpness you weren't expecting. Don't feel sorry, she says softly. I've had worse beds and better pay. Mary's not ashamed. She's calculating. Her stay here is temporary. She's saving up to buy a stall at the market, something small, with a red and white awning. She even has a name picked out, Lemon and Lark. It sounds like a bakery or a spell. You nod. She nods back. She's not looking for rescue. She's looking for runway. Outside again, you walk past a donation box nailed to a wall, engraved with the phrase, "Help us save the innocent." The irony slaps you in the face like a wet fish. Innocence wasn't a thing you were born with, it turns out. In Victorian society, it was something others decided you had, or had lost, often without your input. This is the core of it. Prostitutes were useful as villains, but dangerous as humans. That's why the rescue industry worked so hard to reshape them into something palatable. Not free, just sanitized. You pass another reform home, not Mrs. Thistle's kind, but the proper kind, all whitewashed walls and sermons on loop. A brass plaque boasts of 400 girls rescued this year. You know better now. Rescued from what and into what? Many girls left those places worse off than they arrived, robbed of autonomy, privacy, and even their names. Reformed often meant isolated, unemployed, and one rumor away from ruin. Some were sent into domestic service, where they faced the same harassment as before, but with less agency and no wages of their own. And yet, Victorian society saw these institutions as triumphs of moral compassion. They were proof that vice could be scrubbed clean with enough starch and scripture. It's not all gloom, though. The cracks in the system made room for people like Mrs. Thistle, and for women like Mary, and the other girls who learned to play the game, to nod, to kneel, to sew straight lines by day, and disappear into the city's undercurrent by night. You follow that current now. It leads you past a tea shop, a closed haberdashery, and a chimney sweep's cart, all quiet, all proper. But behind one curtain, someone laughs. Behind another, a man counts coins. And somewhere above your head, a woman gazes at a half moon and plans her next move. This world didn't need saviors, it needed space. And some of these women made their own. You push open a heavy oak door, the kind with a bell that tinkles a little too loudly, and step into what looks like a drawing room, until you notice the faint scent of brandy roses and cologne lingering in the curtains. A pair of gloves rests on the side table. One is stained with what might be lipstick, the other with what is definitely ink. You re-inside one of London's finer brothels now, though no one would ever dare call it that to its face. The wallpaper is expensive. Floral, hand-painted, slightly peeling near the corners. On the mantel sits a crystal clock ticking too fast. A parlor maid passes by carrying a tray of tiny custard tarts and doesn't meet your eye. She's perfected that neutral face pleasant but unreadable, like the last chapter of a mystery novel with the final page torn out. This is no alleyway establishment. This is what they called a disorderly house, a polite legal euphemism that covered everything from elite bordellos to clandestine rooms above pubs. Disorderly didn't refer to the mess. It referred to the morals. The decor, however, was usually immaculate. Here's the mainstream fact for this stop. Many high-end brothels were run by women, often former sex workers themselves, who operated as businesswomen with detailed ledgers, house rules, and even employee evaluations. Yes, really? You peek into a back room, half-curtained and glowing with a warm shimmer of candlelight. A chaise lounge, a bottle of port, and a faintly ridiculous painting of cherubs above the fireplace. A woman named Agnes leans over a desk, counting shillings. She wears her hair in a braided crown and speaks in sharp whispers. This is her house. She's been running it for 12 years. She pays the local constable monthly. She pays the laundress weekly. She pays the girls nightly. You listen in as she adjusts the books. Every detail matters: who worked when, what they earned, how much they owe for rent and wardrobe. Yes, wardrobe. Many houses loan gowns, jewelry, even wigs. It was a constant balance between illusion and overhead. Some clients came here for an hour. Some stayed the weekend. The top girls, house favorites, could make the equivalent of a middle-class income. But it wasn't free money. There were rules. No drinking on shift, no yelling, no letting the banker from Kensington recognize the butcher from Whitechapel. And no falling in love, ever. Of course, they did anyway. You trail behind one of the girls, Lucy, as she heads upstairs. She's in her early 20s and walks like she's floating above the floorboards. Her room is small but kept lavender scented, with a chipped porcelain lamp and a book of poetry under her pillow. She earns more than her brother does at the docks. She sends half of it home and keeps the other half in a tea tin marked biscuits. You get the feeling there are no biscuits. She tells you, without looking up, that she doesn't mind the work. It's the pretending afterward, she says. You smile. You nod. You forget who you are long enough to be whoever they paid for. Downstairs, you spot a ledger open to this week's earnings. Each girl has her own mark, a star, a flower, a moon. One even signs hers with a tiny teacup. It's efficient, impersonal, and just a bit whimsical. Agnes runs this place like a ship's captain. If the ship were made of velvet and secrets. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some brothels employed cats, not just for pest control, but as mascots. One particularly fat tabby named Chairman Meow was rumored to choose which clients got which rooms. If he liked you, you got the window suite. If he didn't, well, the attic was drafty. The clients themselves came in every shade. Old money aristocrats, up-and-coming bankers, officers, artists, widowers, and occasionally newlyweds with curiosities they wouldn't dare mention at Sunday lunch. They signed false names, left generous tips, and told themselves this wasn't cheating, just urban relief. Historians still debate whether these elite houses offered more safety than the streets. Some say yes, fewer risks, cleaner conditions, reliable earnings. Others point out that emotional burnout, substance abuse, and power imbalance still loomed large. And then there was the rent. Most of these women paid to live in the house board, food, clothing, and presentation upkeep, which included perfume, hairpins, and a baffling number of satin gloves. One girl confessed she'd spent nearly a third of her income on lotions alone. Men want you soft, she said, even when the world's gone hard. You hear a knock at the front door. It's a courier delivering wine, roses, and a sealed note addressed in calligraphic script. The envelope bears no return name, but inside is a poem. Badly written, overly dramatic, rhyming fire with desire. You smirk, so does Lucy. Some clients believe they were in love. Some genuinely were. Some were just lonely. You exit through the back stairs, past the linen cupboard, where a redhead named Mabel is ironing lace with one hand and eating dried cherries with the other. She asks if you've seen the parrot. You haven't, she sighs. He's probably flirting with the pianist again. Outside, the wind picks up. A cab clatters past. You hear distant piano notes, something soft and minor, like a memory wearing perfume. The house behind you flickers back into silence. And you walk on, knowing you've just visited a business, a sanctuary, a prison, and a performance all rolled into one. Because that's what these places were, stage and sanctuary. And the women inside, they weren't just surviving. They were running empires, one velvet curtain at a time. You're not in the parlor anymore. The gaslights are fewer here. The mud is deeper, and the silence is different, more suspicious than serene. Welcome to the alleyways behind Bishopsgate, where you don't find the brothels with soap wallpaper and custard tarts. You find the girls with chapped hands and sore ankles, standing under rain-soaked eaves and pretending the cold doesn't make them flinch. This is the domain of the streetwalker. You turn the corner and nearly trip on a broken wooden crate. A girl steadies you with a laugh. Her name is Nell. She's 19, says she's 21, and looks about 16 in the flicker of the lamplight. She wears 2 petticoats, both torn, and one enormous hat, which may be the only thing shielding her from both rain and judgment. Nell is what polite Victorians called a casual girl, working the streets instead of under Madam's roof. She has no employer, no set hours, no real protection. What she does have is the kind of survival instinct you'd envy if it didn't hurt to watch. Tonight, she's walking the Strand, a spot known for its mix of drunks, poets, and soldiers on leave. You follow her, not too closely. She nods at 2 other girls on the corner, one missing her front teeth, the other wearing gloves with the fingers cut off. They all look different, but they walk the same. Fast, head high, like they're daring the world to judge them any more than it already has. Most don't know where they'll sleep tonight. Some won't sleep at all. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the stroll. In the 1870s, it's estimated that over 80,000 women in Britain were engaged in prostitution in some form. The vast majority were streetwalkers, unregulated, unprotected, and completely at the mercy of their surroundings. You pause near an old warehouse. It's been empty for months, but tonight, Nell slips inside through a side door. It's a lurk, a place to warm up, maybe sleep for a bit before starting again. Inside, it smells like damp rope and mildew. Someone's left a candle stub burning. There's a man snoring in the corner. He doesn't wake. You sit with her for a while. She tells you about her first client, an older gentleman who said he wanted to rescue her but forgot his wallet and his name. And her dignity? She shrugs. It's a game, she says. You can be the dice or the player, never both. Streetwalkers had to stay alert. They watched for police, yes, but also for other girls, rival gangs, drunk clients, and nosy neighbors. Many carried small knives. A few carried razors, some simply memorized where to run. And yet, despite the constant risk, many women chose the streets over the brothels. Why? Because freedom, even dangerous, muddy, exhausted freedom, still meant something. There was no madam skimming profits. No forced rules. No parlor tricks. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some women carried silk flowers to distinguish themselves from pickpockets or beggars. A red rose might mean new in town. A yellow daffodil, looking for a regular. Whether it worked or not is unclear, but it gave them a symbol in a city that preferred to pretend they didn't exist. Nell pulls out a little notebook. It's battered and water-stained. She doesn't write in it. She just flips through. You glimpse a few names, little stars beside them, and what look like fees. It's a client ledger, coded so she can pretend it's a grocery list if someone asks. One name has 3 stars. She doesn't tell you why. Victorian men were notorious for their double lives, but for casual girls, the clients were often just as desperate. Lonely dock workers, husbands with silent wives, clerks who wanted to feel powerful for half an hour. One man paid Nell a full night's wage just to sit beside him while he cried. She says that was the easiest sixpence she ever earned. Historians still argue whether these brief, transactional connections offered any real intimacy. Some say no, just economics in action. Others argue that, in a society starved of emotional language, even paid touch mattered. You follow Nell to her next stop, a row of basement-level flats. One of her friends has a room and lets her use the floor when she's out. It's damp. Smells like wet laundry. A rat scuttles by. She doesn't even look up. You notice her boots. Too big. Men's boots, probably stolen, with paper stuffed in the toes. Her toes, blistered and raw, peek through when she crouches. Nell pulls a small bottle from her coat, gin. You both know it's more than a drink, it's a numbing agent. It keeps the cold out and the memories fuzzed just enough to endure. She doesn't offer you any. She doesn't need to. Not far from here is a police post. A constable stands outside chewing a peppermint. He knows who she is. She nods at him and he looks away. That's how it works. Keep moving, keep quiet. Unless someone complains, no one wants the paperwork. But if someone does complain, that's when the trouble starts. Women like Nell could be arrested for loitering for immoral purposes. A charge so vague it could apply to anyone standing still for longer than a sneeze. Once inside the system, they face public medical exams forced, humiliating, unsanitary. More on that horror show soon. For now, Nell's night isn't over. She fixes her hat in a cracked mirror, pinches her cheeks for color, and sets off again. You don't follow this time. She doesn't need a shadow. She needs the next coin, the next quiet hour. The next, okay, I'll be fine. You step away, boots sinking into the muck. You feel the weight of the city on your shoulders, not just its filth, but its hypocrisy. Men walked these streets seeking comfort while drafting laws to criminalize it. Women like Nell were condemned for their choices, but rarely offered better ones. And still she walked. You dry your boots on a pub doorstep near Charing Cross. It's still early evening, but you can already see the men gathering tall hats, tight collars, the occasional monocle wobbling over a whiskey. They come in twos and threes, speaking in low tones, pretending they're here for a drink or a quick newspaper read. But you know better. You've seen the pattern now. Tonight, you follow one of them. He's average height with polished boots, a fob watch, and a face that screams middle management in a shipping firm. He checks his cufflinks as he turns onto a quieter street, nothing shady yet, but definitely specific. You trail him to a side entrance of a boarding house where a young woman waits in a lavender shawl. They exchange no words. She opens the door. He slips inside like he's late for confession. This is the gentleman's dilemma. See, Victorian men were raised in a society obsessed with purity, but only for women. Men, it was believed, had certain urges they couldn't help. A boy might be praised for resisting temptation, but no one was surprised when he didn't. What you're watching now isn't just a transaction. It's a balancing act between desire and reputation. Because for all their proclamations of virtue, these gentlemen were the system's best clients and its biggest hypocrites. The man reappears an hour later. His cravat is slightly loose, his cheeks pinker, but his posture, absolutely unchanged. He walks back into the night like nothing happened. And legally, nothing did. Here's your mainstream fact. Victorian England had no laws against purchasing sex itself. Prostitution was not illegal. What was illegal was soliciting in public, running a brothel, or living off immoral earnings. In other words, the workers were criminalized. The clients were simply tolerated. Society bent over backward to protect male reputations. A nobleman caught in a brothel might face a mild social whisper. A woman caught walking near one could be jailed. No double standard here, just the usual Victorian brand of purity politics with a side of plausible deniability. You head east toward Holborn, where the clientele shifts. Fewer aristocrats, more clerks and tradesmen. These men might not afford the courtesans of Piccadilly, but they still have coin and curiosity. You watch one lean against a lamppost, fiddling with his gloves, waiting for a girl who never arrives. After 20 minutes, he gives up and walks away, muttering something about decent women these days. You almost laugh. Gentlemen carried around a curious shame, not guilt, exactly, but a kind of embarrassed necessity. They weren't proud of visiting prostitutes, but they didn't truly regret it either. Many claimed it was safer than pursuing unmarried women of their own class. Safer reputationally, that is, not physically. Which brings us to a particularly awkward corner of history. Gentlemen's guidebooks. Yes, those existed. Tucked behind the bookshelves of certain tobacconists and tailors were small, anonymous publications meant to educate young men on navigating the city's night world. Titles like The Gentleman's Companion in London as Nocturnal Delights, or The Man of Pleasure as Illustrated Pocket Oracle. Most were part travel guide, part morality play, part softcore nonsense. Inside, tips on avoiding disease, haggling for prices, and identifying reputable establishments. They warned against falling in love, spending too much, or speaking too loudly. And they always ended with a quote from Shakespeare, because nothing says decorum like cloaking vice in iambic pentameter. Historians still argue whether these guidebooks were genuinely practical or just wishful fantasies for bored shop clerks. But their popularity was undeniable. One even had a fold-out map. Not that you need one by now. You duck into a nearby tea shop. It's quiet, nearly empty, and smells of cloves. A man sits alone in a corner, scribbling in a notebook. He could be a writer or a client planning his next visit. You'll never know. That's part of the point. The real tension wasn't just between men and women. It was between fantasy and reality. Victorian men were told to seek wives who were pure and untouched, yet they were expected to gain experience beforehand. But where and with whom? You see the trap now. Women were either angels or whores. There was no space between, no gray area, no category for someone who needed money but didn't want to be erased by shame. And so men compartmentalized. They married the angel, visited the other, and told themselves it wasn't hypocrisy, it was necessity. Here's your quirky tidbit, one notorious. London doctor in the 1860s made a fortune selling male rejuvenation tonics, advertised to gentlemen who exhausted themselves in nocturnal enthusiasm. The ingredients? Mostly water, a dash of opium, and enough cinnamon to make your mouth cry. But they sold like hotcakes. You walk past a gentleman's club now, not the modern kind with neon lights, but the Victorian kind with dark oak walls and leather chairs, and an unspoken rule that women enter only as ghosts or scandal. Inside, men read newspapers and pretend not to know each other from the brothel across the square. Outside, a woman waits under an awning. Her hair is pinned back. Her dress is modest, but the way she stands, how she looks up only when a man passes, that tells you what's really happening. And just like that, the dance begins again. She looks at him. He hesitates. She steps forward. He steps closer. They speak in a code you now understand. They vanish into the alley, leaving behind only footprints, a warm cigarette butt, and 1,000 years of societal pretense. The dilemma isn't theirs alone. It's the entire culture's. A society that demanded silence but whispered secrets in every corner, that condemned desire while quietly monetizing it. You walk on. Another man approaches another girl. Another moment of practice transaction slips into the night. And somewhere a wife pours tea for guests, unaware or maybe very aware that her husband's late tonight. You wake the next morning to the sound of cartwheels clattering across cobblestone, but this isn't your bed. You're standing now, quietly, inside a narrow room that smells of pine tar, iodine, and ink. A large white sheet flutters from an open window, freshly laundered or recently surrendered. You're not sure. Welcome to the consulting room of a Victorian venereal inspector, or as the women called them, the examiners. This is the other side of the Victorian sex trade, the clinical one. The state-sanctioned attempt to contain what it would neither acknowledge nor understand. It begins with a knock on the door. Not yours, of course. A girl's. She's been seen loitering, accused of soliciting, or more likely reported by a neighbor tired of hearing footsteps at odd hours. She has no legal recourse. She's arrested under the Contagious Diseases Acts. Here's your mainstream fact. Passed in the 1860s, the Contagious Diseases Acts allowed police to forcibly examine any woman suspected of prostitution in designated military towns and ports. The aim? To prevent the spread of syphilis and gonorrhea among soldiers. The result? A medicalized nightmare for tens of thousands of women. You stand aside as a pale girl named Frances is led inside. She's 16, maybe. Her hands tremble. The inspector doesn't speak to her, doesn't ask permission. Just instructs her to lie back, open her knees, and relax. She winces. The cold metal of a speculum is the first touch she's had today and the most dehumanizing. These exams were performed by male doctors, often hurried, rarely sanitary, sometimes daily. Women who refused could be jailed. Women who complied could still be detained. Infected women were sent to lock hospitals, prison-like facilities where they were treated without consent, sometimes with mercury, sometimes with silence. It's hard to overstate the indignity. Imagine being accused of corruption, violated by law, and then discarded when you're no longer a risk. And remember, men were never subjected to these checks. Only women. Only ever the women. Historians still argue whether the acts were genuine public health measures or state-sponsored misogyny. Some medical officers insisted they saved lives. Others admitted it was all about control. A few quietly destroyed their own records in shame decades later. You pass into another room, this one lined with ledgers and formal medical notes written in precise cursive. Every woman has a file. Most include nothing more than a name, age, suspected number of clients, and whether she resisted. There are check marks beside words like compliant, clean, or repeat. One entry reads simply, dead, no family. That's it, no cause. No kindness. Here's your quirky tidbit, if you were still collecting them. One inspector was infamous for misusing his position to write erotic fiction based on patient details. He was eventually dismissed, not for writing it, but for publishing under his own name. You exit the building and walk into a protest. Well, a polite one. This is England. A cluster of women in long skirts and serious bonnets stands beside a handwritten banner that reads, "Repeal the Acts now." One of them hands you a leaflet titled "The Shield." As part of a campaign run by Josephine Butler, a woman with more moral backbone than half of Parliament. She wasn't a prostitute. She was a middle-class wife, mother, and an academic. And yet she made it her life's mission to end the Contagious Diseases Acts, arguing that they turned women into state property and institutionalized sexual hypocrisy. You listen as she speaks to the crowd. Her voice isn't angry, it's tired. Controlled. Unyielding. She quotes scripture and science in the same breath. She tells the story of a girl who was examined 137 times before dying of septicemia. She doesn't use the word righteous. She doesn't have to. Not everyone supports her. Many men shout her down. Some women do too. One pamphlet accuses her of encouraging licentiousness by opposing the exams. She receives death threats. So does her family. Her children are mocked at school, and still she stands. You follow her afterward, walking beside her in the street. She keeps a notebook with names of the dead. Women she met in hospitals, on the street, in the cells. She never calls them fallen, only forgotten. The campaign grows. By the 1880s, it becomes impossible to ignore. Women across Britain sign petitions, publish essays, march. The acts are suspended, then repealed, but the damage remains. The fear, the shame, the way the word clean was weaponized like a sword. Even today, historians struggle to count the full toll. Thousands of lives, most of them erased. Thousands of names never written down. And yet they shaped the law. They shaped resistance. They shaped Josephine Butler. You pass the hospital again. A girl stands outside now. She's smoking, barely more than a silhouette. She knows what's inside. She knows what's waiting. And she hasn't decided yet. You look away not out of shame, but out of respect. The next time someone mentions Victorian values, you'll think of her. And you'll wonder if they remember this. You're walking again, this time into a neighborhood where curtains twitch a little faster and gossip drips like molasses from every windowsill. Welcome to the world of the respectable poor, that strangely elastic term that meant struggling, but with good posture. Here, prostitution isn't a profession, it's a scandal. Or worse, a rumor. And in Victorian England, a rumor could be a death sentence, socially at least. You step into a tenement hallway off Bethnal Green. The wallpaper is yellowed. The floorboards creak like they're trying to confess something. And a baby cries 2 floors up angrily, as if it knows what future it's been handed. On the 2nd floor lives Margaret, 32, unmarried, makes shirts for a textile shop 12 hours a day. She also occasionally takes visitors after hours. No official clients. No obvious transactions, but she has a second key and it opens a back entrance. You do the math. Margaret considers herself respectable. She goes to church, pays rent on time, doesn't swear unless she drops a needle. But when the wage for factory seamstresses is $1 a day and bread costs half that, morality starts to look like a luxury item. This is the gray zone. You see, not all Victorian sex work happened in brothels or alleys. Much of it was discreet, sporadic, and desperately pragmatic. A widow might take a lodger. A laundress might accept gifts from a grocer. A housemaid might entertain the master's nephew when the wife was away, and they never, ever talked about it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By 1881, over 1 million women in Britain were working in domestic service or textile trades, both of which paid so little that supplementing income through sex wasn't rare, just unspoken. Margaret doesn't consider herself a prostitute, nor do her neighbors unless someone wants to insult her. It's a knife always hovering, ready to cut her off from church, charity, or childcare. One whisper from a jealous tenant, and she could be turned out. That's the Victorian twist. Morality wasn't just personal, it was political. Women policed each other, sometimes more viciously than men did. Reputation was power, and the latter was made of other women's backs. You head downstairs, passing an older woman scrubbing the stairwell. She looks up and squints. "You visiting Margaret?" She asks, without asking, then goes back to her bucket. Even kindness is conditional here. There's a tiny market just down the road. You stop in as Margaret does her shopping. She buys onions, stale rolls, and luxury of luxuries, half a lemon. She says she's saving to start a hat mending service. She's good with ribbons and better with gossip. She's already calculated how many clients it'll take to afford a second-hand sewing machine. You ask if she's afraid of the law. She shrugs. "I'm more afraid of being hungry." There's no noble tragedy in her tone, just arithmetic. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian. Women would wear a fake wedding ring in public to avoid being mistaken for prostitutes, or to make their clients more comfortable. One even had hers engraved with, "For hire, not for keeps," a touch cynical. Deeply efficient, Margaret walks home past a bakery. The boy behind the counter watches her, unsure whether to smile or not. She doesn't look at him. She knows how fast kindness can turn sour. At home, she lights a candle, folds shirts, and hums to herself. It's not a sad tune. It's brisk, purposeful. You realize she's figured it out. How to live between definitions. Victorian society loved binaries, pure, impure, wife, horror. Saved, lost. But the reality you now see was far more complex. Most women didn't fall into neat categories. They slipped between them, reinvented themselves nightly, and dodged moral shrapnel wherever they could. Historians still argue whether respectable sex work was resistance, resignation, or just realism. It doesn't matter to Margaret. She's already lived the answer. You step back into the hallway and glance up the stairwell. The scrubbing woman is gone. In her place, a note pinned to the railing. "Keep the noise down. Children sleep here." Children. Always watching, always absorbing the rules before they can read. You walk outside. The street is quieter now. A lamplighter passes, leaving golden puddles of light along the curb. You see 2 girls across the way, no older than 14, comparing coins and candy in their apron pockets. One of them will likely face Margaret's choice in 5 years, maybe less. And she'll have to decide whether to be hungry or whispered about. And either way should be punished. The cruelty wasn't just in the poverty. It was in the performance, in being told to appear dignified on a diet of dry bread and promises, in being judged for surviving creatively in a world that offered so few doors and even fewer keys. You look back once at Margaret's window. There's a flicker of candlelight. A figure passes behind the curtain. Someone's visiting. You don't watch, because Margaret deserves at least that much, the dignity of her own silence. You step off the beaten path, drawn by the faint strains of music spilling from a dimly lit hall. The sign above the door reads, "The Angel's Share, a gin palace, one of the newer watering holes springing up in East London." Inside, it's smoky and loud, filled with a mixture of dock workers, barmaids, and a scattering of girls who look like they don't belong anywhere else. The air vibrates with laughter and clinking glasses, punctuated by the occasional cough. You find a corner seat and watch the scene unfold. A group of girls lean on the bar, their eyes sharp, but their smiles tired. They're not here to dance or flirt, but to work, to sell companionship one drink at a time. These women are the bar girls. Not prostitutes in the traditional sense, but something blurred. They're saleswomen, performers, and sometimes much more. Their goal? To keep the drinks flowing and the tips generous. Many use charm as currency, hoping to avoid the harsher realities of the streets. Bar girls often faced a unique set of challenges. They navigated between employers and clients, and often were at the mercy of landlords who could evict them on a whim. Yet the tavern offered a kind of temporary refuge, a stage where they controlled the performance, at least for a while. Here's your mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, gin palaces were among the most common venues where women engaged in semi-professional sex work, blurring lines between hostessing, companionship, and prostitution. You watch a young woman named Rose light a cigarette with a trembling hand. She tells you her story in whispers. She came from a rural village, fleeing a harsh stepfather and a cold farmhouse. The city was supposed to be freedom, but it quickly became a maze of debts, dangers, and lost nights. Yet she's proud. "We work hard," she says. "We laugh harder, and sometimes we cry softer." Rose points to a man in a threadbare coat nursing a pint. "That one's a regular, calls me darlin'. Doesn't want anything but a chat. Sometimes that's all I need." Bar girls often cultivated relationships with regulars who sought more than a quick transaction companionship, a listening ear, or simply warmth on a cold night. These bonds, while fragile, offered moments of dignity amid the chaos. But the job had a toll. The hours were brutal, the alcohol constant, and the temptations to drink more than you could afford always lurking. Many bar girls struggled with addiction and exhaustion, and few had access to medical care. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some taverns employed musicians to play lullabies during the last hour before closing, hoping to coax bar girls to leave before trouble started. The musicians were paid double when the girls stayed longer, turning the music into both a warning and an incentive. Historians still debate whether bar girls had more agency than streetwalkers or brothel workers. Some argue they occupied a precarious middle ground, vulnerable yet relatively autonomous. Others see them as victims of economic desperation and gendered expectations. You leave the gin palace and step into the damp air of early morning. Rose's laughter lingers in your ears, a mix of defiance and exhaustion. The city wakes slowly. The women who inhabit its margins do the same, each carrying their own stories, their own survival strategies, their own quiet rebellions. And as you walk away, you realize this world isn't just about shadows and sorrow. It's about resilience, about finding light in the darkest corners. You slip through a narrow lane where the fog clings like a damp shawl, and the gas lamps barely penetrate the gloom. This part of London is whispered about, but rarely visited by those with respectable reputations. Here, you encounter the Fallen Women's Refuge, grim, gray building known locally as the House of Mercy. Inside, everything smells of starch and sorrow. The floors creak under heavy boots, and the clatter of metal utensils echoes from the kitchen. Women in plain dresses move silently, their faces marked by exhaustion and the weight of secrets. The House of Mercy was established to reform prostitutes, but its methods were strict and often cruel. You're struck by the iron discipline, morning prayers, assigned work, and an endless regimen of penance. Many of the women here have been sent by courts or families, forced to leave behind lives they barely controlled. Some arrived voluntarily, seeking escape from violence or starvation, only to find confinement and judgment. Here's a mainstream fact. Reformatories like this one proliferated in the late Victorian era, often run by religious charities, offering shelter but demanding submission to strict moral codes. You meet Clara, a woman in her late 20s, with eyes too tired for tears. She speaks softly of lost freedom, but also of small victories, teaching herself to read, finding solace in a worn Bible, and dreaming of a day when she might walk outside without fear. You learn about the daily routines, chores, sewing, silent meals, and the dreaded weekly medical inspections reminiscent of the Contagious Diseases Acts. But now, inside the refuge's walls, some women found these homes places of safety. Others saw them as prisons. There were whispered stories of punishments for disobedience and escape attempts that ended badly. Quirky tidbit: one reformatory had a garden maze used as a reflection space, but many women claimed it was actually a confusing trap designed to punish those who tried to sneak away. Historians debate whether these homes genuinely rehabilitated women or merely extended their social exile. Some argue they reinforce class and gender hierarchies, while others see them as early forms of social work. You leave the House of Mercy feeling the heavy silence trail behind you, a reminder of the countless lives confined by society's narrow definitions. Outside, the fog lifts slightly, revealing the bustling city beyond, where women like Clara might one day seek new paths, far from judgment. You find yourself at the docks just as dawn spills over the Thames, the fog mixing with the salty air. The river is the city's bloodstream, carrying ships, goods, and stories from all corners of the world. Alongside the workers unloading crates, you notice a handful of women who move with purpose rather than dawdle, a blend of dockside barmaids and, yes, sex workers who ply their trade among the sailors and laborers. These women, sometimes called tars mates, have a reputation both rough and revered. They know the rhythms of the tides and the shifts of the men who pass through. For them, the docks offer opportunity and danger in equal measure. You watch one woman named Polly, her bright red scarf a stark contrast to the grime of the warehouses. Polly is known for her sharp wit and quicker smile. She jokes with sailors, earns a coin here and there, but never stays in one place too long. Her nickname? The Mermaid, because she seems to disappear as suddenly as she appears. Mainstream fact: ports like London's were hotspots for prostitution, with women often following ships' arrivals, catering to transient crews, especially in military or merchant fleets. The sailors' pay and isolation created steady demand. You overhear a sailor complaining about the shabby sorts, but Polly isn't one to be discounted. She's savvy about who pays and who's trouble, often avoiding the latter by using coded signals and a network of friends. A quirky tidbit: some port workers believed in lucky charms to protect them from venereal diseases, items like rabbit feet, small crosses, or even crocodile dung, which was oddly touted as a protective salve. Whether Polly believed in these charms is unclear, but she certainly had her own rituals. The work at the docks is perilous. Sailors could be violent, police inspections frequent, and health risks high. But Polly and her peers developed resilience born of necessity and camaraderie. They shared tips on clean clients, hidden medical remedies, and escape routes from danger. Historians still debate whether these women were victims of circumstance or active agents shaping their own destinies. Some argue that the dockside sex trade was a survival strategy in a hostile economy. Others see evidence of strong, independent communities forming around these trades. As you walk away from the docks, the sun breaks through the mist, illuminating the river's shimmering surface. Polly's laughter echoes behind you, a reminder that even in hardship, there's joy, rebellion, and a fierce will to live. You find yourself wandering into a dimly lit theater on Drury Lane, the scent of grease paint and candle wax thick in the air. Here, the worlds of performance and prostitution blur. The women on stage aren't just actresses, they're entertainers, courtesans, and sometimes something more. This is the realm of the theatrical courtesan, a figure both glamorous and misunderstood. You watch a young actress named Lillian rehearse her lines, her laughter ringing out in stark contrast to the dusty seats and creaking floorboards. Behind the scenes, she juggles scripts, admirers, and the careful management of her image. To the audience, she's a star. Offstage, she's negotiating the same complex web of survival and desire as others in her trade. Mainstream fact: many actresses in Victorian London supplemented their income through relationships with wealthy patrons. The stage offered visibility, but also vulnerability, and many women used their talents to cultivate influential clients. Lillian tells you that being a courtesan is like acting without a script, each encounter a performance, each relationship a carefully constructed role. She wields her charm like a weapon and a shield, navigating a world where beauty and wit can be currency. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some theatrical courtesans kept elaborate diaries detailing their clients' whims, favorite wines, and even how they preferred their tea information passed down as valuable gossip or used for subtle leverage. Theaters themselves were hotbeds of scandal and intrigue. Audiences came not just for entertainment, but for glimpses into forbidden worlds. Newspaper columns hinted at secret rendezvous and backstage romances, feeding public fascination. Historians still argue whether theatrical courtesans were empowered agents, shaping their destinies, or victims of a system exploiting their talents and vulnerabilities. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. As the curtains fall on the rehearsal, Lillian adjusts her dress and smiles. Behind the glamour lies grit, a determination to control her narrative, no matter the cost. You step outside into the London twilight, carrying with you the echoes of laughter, applause, and whispered secrets of a world where performance was survival, and survival was the greatest act. You follow the fading echoes of laughter down a narrow cobblestone street toward a dimly lit tavern known as the Red Herring. The air is thick with smoke, the scent of spilled ale, and whispered deals. Inside, the atmosphere is tense but electric, a crossroads where politics, class, and desire intertwine. This is where the politicians and power brokers meet the women who understand their secrets better than their wives ever could. The so-called kept women, or mistresses of influential men-women who wield influence behind velvet curtains rather than in parliament halls. You spot a woman named Eleanor, known to some as Lady Rose, a title earned not by birth but by favor. She's draped in silk and sapphire, her smile practiced but genuine. Eleanor knows how to listen and when to speak, a skill that's kept her safe in a world that doesn't to welcome women with power. Mainstream fact: Victorian high society tolerated, and often relied on, discreet relationships between powerful men and their mistresses. These arrangements were unofficial but common, allowing men to maintain public respectability while indulging private desires. Eleanor tells you that being a mistress is like holding a double-edged sword. She has comfort, gifts, and status, but also secrecy, vulnerability, and a precarious position in the social order. A whispered scandal could ruin her and her protector alike. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some mistresses kept detailed ledger books tracking expenses, gifts, and favors, a kind of financial diary to manage their delicate households and maintain appearances. Despite the glitter, Eleanor's world is not without its rules. Loyalty is currency, discretion is survival, and independence, though limited, is fiercely guarded. Historians still argue whether these women were complicit in perpetuating patriarchal power or subtly subverting it through influence and autonomy. The debate continues, but Eleanor's eyes reflect a quiet defiance. You leave the Red Herring, stepping into the fog-draped streets. The city's shadows stretch long, but within them are stories of strength, compromise, and survival. The lives of Victorian prostitutes and their clients were tangled in a web far more complex than mere transactions. They were about power, agency, desperation, and the human need for connection in a world that demanded silence. You walk onward, carrying these stories with you, unseen but unforgettable. You stroll into the early morning light, the city slowly waking beneath a pale sky streaked with pink. The bustling streets, the gas lamps fading, the distant cries of street vendors all combine to create a symphony of everyday life. But the stories you've gathered, the lives of Victorian prostitutes and their clients linger like a soft shadow, weaving into the fabric of London itself. It's easy to think of these women as mere victims or these men as simple predators. But the truth is more complicated, layered with nuance, survival, and humanity. You recall Nell on the street? Fiery and fearless. Margaret balancing survival and respectability. Rose laughing through exhaustion. Clara confined yet resilient. Polly navigating the docks with cunning. Lillian performing both on and off stage. Eleanor holding power behind closed doors. Each woman, each story, a thread in a vast, often hidden tapestry. You think of the city's hypocrisy, the laws that punished women but spared men, the society that demanded purity yet fueled demand, the resilience born from marginalization. Historians still argue about motivations, impacts, and morality. Was it oppression or agency, survival or submission, whispers or defiance? The answers are as tangled as the fog curling around the Thames. As you walk home, the noise of the city softens. You find a quiet spot, a window with a view of rooftops and chimneys, and sit down. You realize these stories don't just belong to the past. They echo into our present, into conversations about gender, power, and survival that continue today. And maybe, just maybe, by listening, by understanding, you're part of changing the narrative. Now, let the city's hum lull you. The lamplighters finish their rounds. The streets empty, save for the memories you carry. The secret lives you glimpse tonight remind you that history isn't only about grand events or famous names. It's about real people flawed, courageous, surviving. You close your eyes. The city breathes quietly around you, its ancient stones holding secrets and stories beneath the restless sky. The lives you've wandered through tonight were lived in shadow and light, in moments stolen between judgment and desire, hope and despair. Imagine the soft rustle of skirts on cobblestones, the distant murmur of voices muted by fog, the faint scent of tobacco and damp earth mingling in the air. Each woman you met carried her own burden and her own fierce spirit. Their stories are not mere tales of hardship, but of resilience, of courage found in quiet corners, of laughter surviving in the face of loneliness. As you settle deeper into your blankets, feel the weight of history soften around you. The streets of Victorian London may seem far away, but the echoes remain close reminders that survival takes many forms, and that dignity often grows where we least expect it. Let these stories fade gently into your dreams, carried on the hum of the city and the whisper of time. Know that even in the darkest alleys, there is light. Even in silence, there is strength. Sleep now with a heart a little fuller, a mind a little kinder. The past is never truly gone. It lives in the stories we tell and the empathy we share. Good night and sweet dreams.